to other duties as assigned. I'm Brent Schwannekamp, and just looking forward to another opportunity to just share some insight of my experiences as a high school administrator, and hope that anyone who tunes this in, whether they're an administrator at the high school level or any level, or anyone who's aspiring to be in a position of school leadership, might pick up on something that'll help them along the way. That's been my goal since I started this podcast with Keep Indiana Learning, and hopefully this episode does that for you. This is actually the first in kind of a three episode arc around hiring. It is the hiring season, or it's starting to become that here in mid-February, as we start to prepare to kind of fill our teaching staffs for the coming school year. And season 5, episode 5, which is where we find ourselves today, is to talk about hire before you're hiring. And that's kind of an interesting thought process of the best folks that we're able to find, and sometimes the times when we add to our staff in a way when we've found somebody even before there's a position. And I really find that that's a really beneficial thing, because that amount of recruiting and foresight's really important. And I think it allows us to have a plan even before there's a problem, which I love. I mean, that's a really benefit. It allows to keep down on some of the stresses. Now, are there times where a position becomes available and I don't have somebody in mind? Absolutely. That's probably what happens most often. But you have to do more work in those situations. And so the concept of staying ahead of the game is really important, because when you have a vacancy on your staff, when you're thinking about, hey, who's going to teach chemistry next year, or how am I going to fill this AP teaching position, it creates pressure. It creates really significant pressure that allows, or that forces us to you don't want to compromise, but it does, sometimes you're like, oh, am I going to find anybody? You start to get a little bit nervous, you get desperate, but you got to hold those same high standards. And so if you are being reactive and not proactive, it definitely creates the opportunities to make mistakes. And no one is a perfect recruiter and finder of talent. You're going to make mistakes, but man, those mistakes are really challenging, and they create more work in the long run for you as you're trying to build out a great staff. You always want to be recruiting. Anytime you're interacting with teachers, you're recruiting. I think you recruit in how you handle yourself, how if you present at conferences, if you are, you're at a basketball game and there's visiting team there, and there's a cheer coach for the other team, and you interact with them, and who knows, down the road that may be somebody. Well, do you teach in the district? What do you teach? You're always, to me, I am always looking for that next great hire. You always, I'm interested in who's presenting at conferences, who's getting out there and really making a name for themselves, and because you want to be around strong educators. One thing I think that's really important, and this is the long game. This is not the short game, but what about creating a pipeline for your district? We did that here in Plainfield, and we've talked about that on a previous episode about our education professions program. And in that episode, I highlighted what we do to kind of create that pipeline, and it's really powerful. I teach that class here at Plainfield. Our students become CTE concentrators through that, which can help them with graduation. It can help them in the future as they try to earn seals, namely the enrollment seal. But it also helps them because they get 6 free college credits. It helps them because they get real life experience in a classroom to see whether or not education is for them. And for us as a district, it helps to grow that love of teaching. And I think that's really powerful. This past year, I think we hired 4 students of mine that had gone off from our program, went off and earned 4-year degrees. A couple of them came back and student taught in the district, which I think is another way to keep those connections going. And then they've gone on to now be full-time teachers in the district. I think that's huge. I think that's the thing a forward-thinking district and school is doing to try to help themselves fill critical teaching spots. you keep building those pipelines. Like I said, with student teachers, when somebody says, do you want to take this student teacher from XYZ University? That's a challenge, but I've talked to our teachers in our building and said, listen, guys, it's going to be some work to have a student teacher, but man, if we find a good one and somebody who can join our staff and be on our team, it's going to make us all better. And if they're not great, that's okay. We'll coach them. We'll try to help them get better, because we are a profession that helps grow each other. And I think that's really important. Another thing I do is when I talk to new teachers that we're bringing on our staff, I ask the question, hey, who was at the school you're coming from that you think would be a great addition to our staff? Who's a good young teacher who, the next time we have an opening, you should reach out to? We ask everybody in our new teacher cohort to think of those people for us. And I think that's really important. Waiting to post a job and just hoping is not a recruitment strategy. That's an effort. You have to do that. But that also forces you to really go through a lot of bad applications sometimes. And I think that's important to understand. Like, by being proactive, you save yourself from wasting time later going through and trying to find a good applicant. You don't want to wait to the last minute. One thing in our district we do is we give a bonus to a teacher who tells us they're going to retire before December 1st. So that allows us to know and start to plan for the vacancies we're going to have here at Plainfield. We're very lucky that teachers come here. They don't often leave except to retire. And so currently I'm trying to fill several retirements, and that is exciting, trying to build and add to our staff. You don't want to rush the process. You want to take your time. I think one of the things I'll talk about in a later episode of this, but that connection you make with somebody, or the connection you have with somebody through someone else, is really powerful, because that allows you to kind of get the inside scoop on somebody. A piece of paper, a resume, an application, a transcript, a letter of reference, all of those are great. But if I can call up somebody I know who's worked with somebody and said, hey, listen, tell me about this person. Do you think they're a good fit? Do you think they would help us be better? What was something they were really good at? What's something you'd worry about if they were going to be on your team? Those have been really good. I think one of the things that people ask sometimes is, why are you successful? Why is your high school successful? I think everybody should think about that. What makes your school successful? And a lot of times we default to saying, well, we got great kids. And that's true. We do. We have phenomenal students at Plainfield High School. There is no question about that. But man, every 4 years they graduate, they leave, and we have to fill, there's a new group of kids. And so what I lean on is that, what makes us great at Plainfield, in my opinion, is great teachers and great adults who are shaping those kids. And when I look at our current staff, I'm just taken aback by how talented they are. And then I'm burdened with the challenge of, man, how do I build the staff for 10 years from now, for when I'm retiring down the road and someone's coming to take my place? What does that teaching roster look like? Because the teaching roster is pretty darn good. And so that's a really big challenge and a big responsibility that I think is important. You can't only think about next year. You do need to think about next year. Like, what does 26, 27 look for us in terms of a teaching staff? But also, what does 36, 37 looks like? When my first grader is a senior, what does this staff look like? And I think that's really important to think about as well. I think you definitely want to continue to invest in the recruitment process, not just in February, March, and April, but in June, July, and August, in September, October, November. Those are all critical months in this process. Not just waiting until you need somebody, but recruiting all the time. And I think that's a change in your mindset. And you may have to put some things in place. We have our recruitment night that we cover. We talk about it in another episode previously in detail, but that's just a part of our process to continue to build that database of, oh man, we have a last minute teacher leave. Maybe they relocate, and all of a sudden I'm looking for an English teacher in July. Well, if we did a good job at recruitment night, I might have 4 names of people we liked that I can reach out to and try to go from there. And I think that's really powerful. You don't want to fall behind, especially in recruitment. And so you got to get started early. Keep great notes, keep great lists. I keep lists of people that I interview that I like but didn't work out. And they can not work out for a lot of reasons. But I keep those contacts to be able to go back to. It is the most important thing that I do. And I take it very, when I think about what's the most important for me right now, it's that. And that's where I'm investing my time. And time is a really hot commodity for me lately. And just, I feel really like I'm stretching a million different ways. But man, I'm always going to take time. I'm not going to skimp on recruitment. That's a really important piece. Well, I appreciate you listening here. If you liked a little bit of this, if your brain starts thinking about what your recruitment process could be like, what could you do in June and July? What could you do to build a pipeline of future teachers in your community? I think that's really powerful. I thank you for tuning in. We'll continue this conversation in a couple weeks with the next episode when we dive a little bit more into the interview process. But for now, thanks for tuning in to Other Duties as Assigned with Keep Indiana Learning.